Hello and good afternoon, good evening, good morning to everyone. Good day, from wherever time zone you're coming from. Welcome. My name is June Marfori. I am an executive coach, trainer, facilitator, as well as a consultant and director of POWERinU Training and Coaching Philippines. And I welcome you to this complimentary webinar exploring the heart behind ESG initiatives about our competent and very respectable speaker resource for this evening. And you can see his picture right there. His name is Steph Sanyo. And Steph Sanyo serves as a executive director of Coro Clean Energy Philippines, which is a UK-based renewable energy developer with a Philippine pipeline of 1.5 gigawatts in onshore wind and solar power plants. He also serves as a senior consultant on the board of director for companies engaged in industrial development. Steph served as a partner and director of investments and projects for a private capital investment firm and as head of strategic and risk management for the Philippine operation of a global Fortune 100 financial services company. He trained as a systems and control engineer with bachelor's and master's degrees from Washington University in St. Louis, and he also majored in economics and minored in physics. Everyone, let us please welcome our speaker for tonight, Mr. Steph Sanyo. Steph, hello.
Thank you. Good evening, June, and everyone with POWERinU, Trina, for helping me prepare. Very, very glad to be here. Thank you for the kind introduction.
Aside from all of those credentials, Steph and I are very good friends. So I think that's the most important thing I'm most proud of, to have you as our speaker this evening, Steph.
Yes, we are. And that is, source of pride for me as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for accommodating us.
Thank you. And good evening to all the guests, of course. And I know that many of you have been attending this series for a long time. Hopefully you'll learn something tonight. But I really want to learn a lot from you as well. In fact, the format of this evening will be a lot more interactive than the usual webinar or lecture. And therefore, Mr. Marfori actually is our partner in the discussion formally, but really everyone is welcome to chime in. So what I'll do is just go through a very few slides to introduce certain concepts. But I think as we go through them, you will see that they sound familiar because you've probably seen them before, you've practiced them before, and you've probably lived them before. And so I believe with that familiarity, we'll be able to move forward and have more of a back and forth than a one-way communication tonight. So if you'll allow me, obviously the title says the heart behind the initiative, ESG initiatives. Heart because with things happening, trends in ESG now, some of the more concrete and measurable aspects of ESG may be challenged in some places. And what might be left is just the intention and being able to do the right thing anyway, whether they're being measured or not. And we'll get to that in a few slides. So in other words, we want to focus on really the motivation behind it rather than the metrics and the output. So that's why we titled it this way. We only have three goals, really. One is to define what ESG is, so that we have a common dictionary, even though, like I said, it should already sound familiar, because there are some technical aspects to it as well. And then inform all of us on what's going on in the world of, basically in the world economy, and how ESG has become such a major part of it and the challenges that are coming. And number three, call to action, figure out what we can do regardless of the trends that are out there. So again, three things: we define, we inform each other, and we figure out what we can do moving forward. Is that okay so far?
That's good to me. That's good for me. And I hope people can just give a thumbs up sign if they think that's fine as a work through and program flow for this evening. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I am not conversant with Zoom or Teams at all, so thank you for knowing what to do to provide feedback. I'm very low tech, but thank you, Mr. High Tech, June Morfori. Okay. Um, some questions that I've come across when exploring ESG, as well as in discussing it with friends like Mr. Marfori and people, colleagues, coworkers in the industry, in the renewable sector especially, are here. We can ask many more tonight if you want, but basically, normally we want to know what is ESG and how do we do it? Why is it important? It also has a forebear that is quite familiar to us. We call it CSR, corporate social responsibility. Why is that important? How do we apply ESG in our respective organizations? Um, will ESG survive as a formal activity? What are the trends? There is a backlash to ESG. Is this backlash limited to a certain segment in one country or some more specific countries? Is it spreading, and is it going to force a rethink in the way ESG has progressed? And then what options remain as we encounter these headwinds? Can we practice sustainability without the formality of ESG reporting, for example? So these are just the things that we run into. I apologize for continually saying ESG. It sounds so technical, no? But as we define it, you will see that it's really a lot friendlier than it is technical.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
thank you.
just right now, as you were going through this agenda, despite the fact that we went through this a couple of times, probably in the minds of some of the participants here, and certainly my own, from an uneducated and a very laymanized understanding, increasingly, when you say ESG, a lot of people immediately what come to their mind or what comes to their mind is actually the one word that seems to be the catch-all, which is sustainability. So I'm not sure if this is the right time to answer that, or is that going to be covered in one of your slides?
Actually, this is a perfect time to discuss it to make it
Oh,
more understandable. Yeah,
yes.
sustainability is probably the most overarching word that we can use for it. Yes. Thank you. Great point.
Thank you for that. Thank you.
Yes. Okay. Now, one thing that we may have noticed over the last 20 years is that this sustainability concept has really taken hold. I am, I want to claim a younger age, but I'm really 50 years old now. And when I was in university 30 years ago, up to about 24 years ago, that's when a lot of the concepts of environment, conservation, sustainability were really starting to be taught. And at that time, if you look at policy, if you look at the rules of for example, the Philippine government, the SEC, there was nothing requiring anything on sustainability. But what's really interesting is that since those concepts were taught, it has taken hold a lot in the business sector. So in other words, a lot of business schools started teaching it, even though at that time you would think that it's a little bit counter to capitalism, no? That you know, social benefit is not exactly in line with making money. But around 30 years ago, the concept started to be understood that hey, they could be compatible, no? And here's an example, an illustration of how it could be compatible. For those who have studied economics, you might be familiar with the concept of supply and demand and even externality, but forget all those. Let's just go shopping for cell phones, okay? Let's go shopping for cell phones. Suppose there's a store A and store B. Store A is selling a unit X of the same exact cell phone, same manufacturer, model, features, and then store B is selling a unit Y of the same cell phone. So it's the same exact cell phone, but mas mahal si store B by 1,000 pesos. Does it matter which one will buy? And I know Mr. June and I talked about this.
Feel free to chat.
Yeah, let's
Dear
chat.
participants, does it matter? Just say yes if it matters, which unit you buy, or no, it doesn't matter. So just put yes or no. Remember, same manufacturer and model, same features, Both brand new, except that it's more expensive by 1,000, I think, in store B.
Yep.
Yeah, so Ed says yes, it matters.
Yes.
Jed says yes. Sab says yes. So
Yes.
far, we're getting yeses right
Okay.
here.
Next slide. We're still shopping. Okay. What if instead of that unit Y doon sa store B, 11,000, and then unit X is 10,000. Store B says, oh, pareho na silang 10,000. Now, does it matter which unit we buy? Not so much, right? Now, what if, okay, so parehong presyo, we don't care as long as we buy the phone, we spend the same 10,000 pesos. Now, this is where the concept of externality comes in. Na, normally, the price is the only factor we consider when buying something. But as I said, 30 years ago, they started teaching it in schools, even in economics, even in courses that teach capitalism, that acceptable yung externality, yung another factor in your decision that considers the environment or fair labor. Like in 1995, I remember the issue of sweatshops came up very, very strongly against Nike because they were using workers who were underpaid working overtime in very hot factories. No? So around 30 years ago, that's when the concept started becoming part of business. Na, hey, it's okay to accommodate certain factors in deciding what to buy, in deciding to practice trade or capitalism. Now, it's okay to include this. And now, 30 years later, we can see even the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission of the Philippines, already has rules requiring that we consider these things. 30 years ago, did not exist. So, what if pareho presyo, pero if you buy unit Y, the manufacturer of the phone will plant a tree for the same exact price? Does it now start to matter which unit we buy?
So just type away, yes or no. Does it matter if one manufacturer actually will plant a tree for you if you buy from them? Jed says yes, and Janine says yes. Ed Hewitt says yes. Ari says yes. All right, so far we're getting yeses.
Yes, it should start to matter because now there's what we call this external factor. So sorry for the fancy word externality. All it means is there's another factor, an external factor besides just price in choosing to buy something. So it starts to matter that the environment is a factor, planting a tree. Hopefully it's a native species of tree, not an invasive one that will just actually degrade the environment when you
That's
plant it.
true.
No? It
Yep.
has to belong to that place. Okay. Another option, the salesperson might say, okay, same unit, same price, same model, but instead of planting a tree, the manufacturer will grant a scholarship to a deserving college student who is having financial difficulties for the same price of phone. Does it matter which unit we buy?
Okay. So, well, Jed says definitely yes.
Become stronger. Yeah.
Janine says yes. Ari says yes with an exclamation point or exclamation
Yes.
mark. Yeah.
To the
Melanie
point.
gives a thumbs
Yes.
up sign. Thank you.
Great. To the point that maybe, okay, same price, but we're starting to think we might be willing to pay even more, a little more because we gain something out of it, or society
Yep.
gains something out of it.
Yeah.
So that and Mr. Marfori embodies that very well. For those who don't know him, no? Yeah, he's a true humanitarian. So
Thank you.
yes. Now going to another aspect of ESG, what if the salesperson says, okay, same price, but unit X was made by slave labor who works 16 hours a day, and unit Y was made by adequately paid workers who only work 8 hours a day with the proper, labor compliances. Does it matter which phone we buy?
By no chance are you talking about my former employer, are you?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Slave drivers, huh? Yeah.
Okay, so does it
Okay,
matter?
yeah. So this is where our age might show a little bit, no? The young ones were very, very concerned about our working hours.
All right, so
Yeah.
everyone seems to say yes,
Yes.
Steph, right?
Yeah. So these are externalities that now are justified. And then finally, we're going back to the E part, environment part, and this close to my heart because this is what I do for a living. What if Unit X is made using electricity that pollutes the air 99 times more than Unit Y? Does it matter? I'm going to answer it yes. I'll buy the one that was powered by windmills, probably windmills that we build, no? Because
Okay.
coal pollutes 99 times more.
Okay.
Okay. So, kailan nag-umpisa ito? When did all this start?
So
It
sorry,
wasn't, yeah,
Steph.
yes, go ahead, yes.
You don't mind going back to the previous slide, and
Of
I
course,
again
of
I
course.
can't recall if you're going to be covering this, but you might want to give a very short um, I would say not a narrative, but maybe some enlightenment on when people say more, they're willing to pay more for definitely using electricity that does not pollute the air or significantly does not add pollution. Uh, is there any particular baseline or benchmark in particular segments or products or services where you say what is more? I mean, what is 50% acceptable a premium, or is it 20%? I mean, I don't mean to put you in a spot, but for some of us or many of us here who are I would say regular consumers and probably are not controlling corporations or huge organizations, what does that mean for us? What is more, Steph?
This is actually a perfect question to illustrate what's happening in the power industry right now.
Okay.
Uh, 20 years ago, this question, are we willing to pay more, definitely would have applied to solar or wind. Why? Because 20 years ago, it might cost, of course, you won't pay the whole amount, but um, wind and solar, if you got electricity purely from wind and solar sources, you would have paid maybe around 12 pesos per kilowatt hour. And at that time, coal would have cost you maybe six. So you would have had to pay more. But what has happened is because just like anything that scales up, no, the trend goes and then a lot of companies and then people use whatever product comes out, nagmumura siya. And at the same time, you're also doing the right thing because it's less polluting, right? And so what has happened is now, if I sold um, electricity from a wind generator, I might sell it to uh, Meralco for 5 pesos. Do you know how much coal is being sold to Meralco right now? 9 pesos, 8 pesos.
Wow.
So 20 years ago, yes. Are we willing to pay more for wind powered electricity? I know that budgets are tight, but maybe because it's less polluting, we might say yes, we're willing to pay more. But now it's actually cheaper.
Okay. So that's probably not common knowledge, is it?
Nope, it's not. And
Okay.
it's yep. So coal has become a lot more expensive. Oil, diesel, bunker fuel are a lot more expensive because of primarily the what happened with COVID. The supply chains got locked up, logistics got locked up, and then the war in Ukraine.
Okay.
So that's the problem with fuel-based energy is that it's subjected to all this volatility of things
Okay.
happening around the world. So
Okay.
yes, excellent question. I thought it was a loaded question, but it would have been applicable 20 years ago. Now it's
Hmm.
actually cheaper to do the right thing.
I must confess that I was totally unaware of that data point today, and I wonder, in fact, if the regular consumer and even corporations that have extensive use of electricity and have options open to them are actually aware of that.
Well, the good news is yes, and we're trying to bring it lower and lower as far as the consumption.
Okay.
Yeah, the DOE has been very cooperative in the Department of Energy, no, of allowing smaller and smaller consumers of electricity to have
Okay.
options. Dati, you need to have been consuming a half megawatt before you can choose where you get your electricity from.
Okay.
Now it's
Oh,
down to 100 kilowatts.
okay.
Yeah. So like definitely June's house would be qualified. No, just kidding. Yeah. So, but yeah, a hotel or a mall would easily be able to pick their power source.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
That's
Yes.
very informative. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you. Yes. And so we might wonder, okay, I was talking about 30 years ago when they started teaching this and some policies started coming up. But actually, the idea of being able to make a choice on what to buy or what to do for a living, in other words, what to do in a trade, no, in capitalism, being affected or influenced by an external factor goes all the way back to civilization, because even the Bible, the Quran, the Book of Buddha all have some prescription how their faithful followers can only select certain livelihoods that do the right thing. So hindi porke mura itong or kikita ka dito sa hanap buhay na to, hindi porke ganon, pumapayag na yung Bible, yung Christians, Muslims, and Buddhists to do whatever living you want. They will restrict economic activity based on morals.
Okay. So there seems to be some kind of balance between what these various faith expressions and religions would profess vis-a-vis trade or commerce in terms of selection of the manner in which you operate your business or you commercialize your services or your products. So there seems to be some they seem to be intertwined in terms of what is righteous and moral and what is economic or profitable.
Yes, perfectly said. Actually, better than I could have said it. Thank you, Mr. June. Exactly. And therefore, it is no accident that the first ESG investment instrument was by a religious group.
Hmm.
In 1890, the Quakers were a very progressive religion. I would say uh, half of the Protestants in the U.S. are actually quite progressive. What we call them the mainline Protestants, no?
Mhm.
And so a lot of the changes in social policy are driven, at least the moral portion of the changes are driven by these religious sects, such as the Quakers. So they restricted their members to only be able to do business and make investments in shares. By that time, meron na mga shareholdings, may corporations na in the US that they can only invest in no sin business opportunities. And the sin of the moment at that time was slavery.
Okay. Okay.
So it's not an accident that the first externality put into an investment instrument
Right.
was a moral one.
Wow.
And up to now, it's still in a way moral pa rin, di ba?
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
That's very, very informative.
So if we go back to all the cell phone slides, all of that goes back to this, no?
Yeah.
A lot of it is driven by moral considerations.
Okay.
A little bit of the history. So if we talk about how far it goes back, and then when was the first investment guideline, which was in 1890 over there at the very left, no? A lot has happened, but as far as like my awareness, for example, at my age, some of the most memorable ones would be the oil spill, the worst oil spill in 1989. Um, Tapos the Nike sweatshop scandals that I had mentioned
Yes.
earlier, and I was actually living in the States at that time already, or the year after that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, uh, and then the UN Sustainable Development Goals were signed, and kind of have a little bit of a linkage there through my family, my brother's involvement, um, and uh, the largest really hedge fund, BlackRock.
Yeah.
Uh, this is where you see that the fruit of 25 years of being educated as capitalists, huh? Business
Mm-hmm.
people now being concerned about environment, social, and governance issues. The head of BlackRock actually published a letter urging CEOs to consider long-term value, meaning including externalities in making their decisions. COVID actually accelerated the issuance of other investments,
Right.
but in the US, this is where the controversy comes in. So all of this we've been looking for, okay, mostly environment, some about labor, no?
Yeah. Yeah.
But what is now defining the trend in America, which might have negative consequences around the world, is actually nakasingit yan dito. Uh, you were very familiar probably with the term diversity.
Yes.
So But
Yeah.
diversity is yeah, it's kind of a concept. And Sir June, have you seen a lot of diversity initiatives in the Philippines, for example?
There are increasing manifestations of it because led primarily by a lot of very progressive global or multinational companies. DEI and DEI are actually quite major initiatives that are happening. And of course, I don't have a read on a lot of local companies, but I know that increasingly that has been much talked about, publicized, and certainly has become embraced by many, especially the multinational companies. But yes, in the Philippines, definitely.
Absolutely, yes. And I think even in obviously the SEC has been report requiring publicly listed companies to report anyway, but the
Hmm.
multinationals who are not listed here have been reporting on diversity, environment for many years already,
Okay.
voluntarily. Those who are present in the Philippines. So yes, I've also seen it. But I'm glad you mentioned that because I am not in the human capital field,
Hmm.
and so I don't have as much of a feel for it. Now in the Philippines, where race is not as much of an issue, diversity may take um, form as maybe gender diversity,
Yeah.
age diversity,
Hmm.
background diversity, economic background. But that is not really the main source of the threat to ESG. The main threat to ESG, to put it simply, is race. Um,
Hmm.
DEI really accelerated after the 2020 murder of George Floyd, an African
Hmm.
American in Minnesota.
Right.
Uh, and there's a lot of visceral reaction, even from what you would say conservative people who don't normally react very much to incidents like this because it was on the news. It was uh, everybody saw him die,
Yes.
including
Yes.
children watching primetime news. So it was
Right.
visceral. So a lot of people are rethinking that maybe it was just a overreaction that we suddenly wanted to be nice to races that are not Caucasian, no? And uh, and so there's that started not long after the DEI acceleration, where
Yes.
everybody wanted to compensate for injustice. The backlash has come quite fast as well, just in the last couple of years.
Okay.
So DEI is really about in the US, it's about gender, about race, but the forces against it are saying everything about DEI is they think it's wrong, no? So that's the challenge. We'll go back to that in a short while, but I'd like to just finally define what ESG really is. So we know the three words: environment, social, and governance.
Yep.
ESG is a way for companies to perform and report on their activity. So ESG, if you're saving gasoline, saving electricity, saving water, ESG is a framework. So you don't even need the framework. You can do those things already. But if you want to report on them, there are certain formats of reporting them under ESG as a formal structure under the Securities and Exchange Commission of the Philippines.
Okay.
It so now here the second point is the one that we're not familiar with, and this is where actually I believe the opponents of ESG get it wrong. No, ESG is a way for an organization to prepare for the risk that is being caused by these environmental issues. For example, if you're an oil company, you're causing you're driving climate change, right? If as an oil company you have an oil depot on the shores
Yeah.
of the ocean, right? And you're also driving climate change by producing all these carbon dioxide and as well as other pollutants like NOx, SOx, okay, sulfides, sulfates, and nitrates. And then there's a storm surge because of climate change, which we've seen, no? Did you actually identify that as a risk to your
Yeah.
investors?
Right. Interesting question.
And a lot of them are now having to do that. So
Yeah.
actually, ESG is helpful to even polluters because now
Yeah.
they can say, hey, we actually thought about the risk of the things that were kind of driving, bad things that we're driving,
Right.
and
Right.
we are now being affected by it.
Yeah. In effect, it's like calling it out, right?
Yes, correct, exactly.
Yeah. But this time it's calling yourself out.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
And now here's the
Raising my hand and
implication.
saying, we
Yes,
might be guilty of this in the future, but here,
yes,
let me tell you what we're doing about it.
yes. And if you don't do something about it, investors will see that you're not prepared for the
Yep.
consequences. And
Right.
if you're not prepared, investors won't buy your stock.
Yep. Yep. So this
So, yeah,
particularly may affect publicly listed companies, those that trade in the
yes,
stock exchange, and those
yes,
whose stock values are actually being monitored by financial analysts.
yes.
Okay.
The second thing is, again, going to the oil company. So, besides being unprepared for the actual effect of climate change, you may also be unprepared for the transition away from fossil fuels. In other words, you
Right.
keep selling oil, tapos 20 years from now, nobody's buying oil. Are you ready? What have
Right.
you done as a company to be ready for nobody buying oil? You
Yeah.
have to say that now. So, this
Right.
second point, a lot of us have not had to do, I think, no? Especially under CSR, right?
Yes.
But would you say, Sir June, that the first point, okay, we've done that. We know what it is. We're very familiar with it, pretty much under CSR. Yung conservation,
Yes.
helping our community. So that's the first point. The second point is quite new, I believe. Tama ba?
I would think that I've not seen so many of that.
Yes.
Um, but in the industry where I previously had worked on before my retirement from corporate,
Yes.
and this is in the engine manufacturing segment where, because of the various applications for the engines that are produced by ourselves and our competitors, it was not uncommon for companies voluntarily to actually withdraw their products from the market and compensate companies or individuals who have purchased the engines as a overt effort to demonstrate that they realize that there might be some significantly large pollution or a carbon footprint produced by those engines. So I've seen it, but I think they've been far in between, too few.
Okay. But that is actually good, that certain preparations or at least reactions
Right.
to policy and being found out these are highly polluting engines are being done were being done by these companies. So that's actually still positive. Still,
It's still much better to initiate that, which is point number two in this slide,
yeah,
rather than to knowingly actually conceal it and be discovered and be
yeah,
penalized for it, especially if you are a publicly listed company, then
yes,
because then you are actually tagged or labeled as someone who has been non-compliant and probably might be suspected of concealing it, then that may have a brand reputation backlash on you, as well as the financials.
yes. Fantastic. And this has happened to even very big
Okay.
brands, hasn't it?
Okay.
Such as Volkswagen, for example.
Yes, I remember. I do recall.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. So yan, mabuti pa, 'di ba? Wag mo na itago.
Oo nga.
Just be ready and show the investors that you prepared for it. So,
Yep.
yep. And then number three is really a consequence of A and B that now ESG has become a screen for investments. In other words, if you are an investment fund like BlackRock or, for example, the Maharlika Fund of the Philippines, they are actually because they have to follow SEC rules, or at least the companies they buy shares into have to follow SEC disclosures on ESG. Then there's no choice. Any fund will have to use ESG as a screen. In other words, pag pangit yung ESG performance ng tinitingnan nila ng kumpanya, they should not invest in it.
Okay.
If
Okay.
only because of point number two, because the company may not be prepared
Right.
for the
Right.
future.
Yeah.
And so this is the complexity of ESG that was added to traditionally what we knew as CSR.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
But I think it's understandable, right? It's still not very exotic. It's just about being prepared.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, doing some preparation is certainly much better than either plain ignorance or
Right.
concealment or
Right.
concealment. So
Right.
hopefully the increasing awareness makes one much more intentional and purposeful, and therefore can be vigilant.
Yes. Yes. So even though there might be a couple more slides left, this is probably a good a slide to ask. Are there any questions about what ESG is?
Uh,
Any
uh,
other questions?
There is a
Clarification.
specific question that came up quite early in your presentation, and this is from Ed, and allow me to read it. This is probably more on regulation, Philippine regulation, which I'm sure you might be quite familiar with. Is it confirmed that the ERC and the DOE have decreased the contestability level to 100 kilowatts apply for a retail electricity supply? Because what this individual participant knows is that previously, or it still is, at the 500 kilowatt level.
That is exactly what I mentioned before. I do not know the status of when applications can be made, but the direction is going in there. The DOE is actually quite intent on
Okay.
lowering the threshold to 100, specifically 100 kilowatts. Thank you, Ed, for the question. I apologize. I don't have the exact 100% answer, but yes, that is the direction. Whether ERC and DOE have started allowing it, sorry, I cannot answer right now, but I can get back to you on that if you like, or I can
Okay.
research it too. So,
Okay. Steph, while we're waiting for our dear audience to actually raise some questions, uh, uh, I have something that might be much more, should we say, relevant to the individual consumer. Regardless of your status, whether you are actually an employee, an employer, a homemaker, a retired individual, or in whatever profession, when I think of sustainability outside of the perspective of a large organization, one who might have a much more significant influence because of the volume of transactions or the volume of business that I am into. At the individual level, what can I equate? I mean, of course, over and above the illustration of a choice of where to buy a cell phone on a day-to-day basis, when we talk about sustainability, what more other practical examples can you cite for someone like myself, for instance?
okay. You will be surprised at what we ask of companies. Let me see if I can get a different slide here to show you what what is asked of companies. Surprisingly similar to what we can do as individuals.
Okay.
But let me find it for a minute. Um, okay.
Yeah, because when you look at sustainability and environment, primarily, and what comes to my mind, for instance, Steph, is that
Yes.
having joined a conference maybe last year, I remember one of the speakers on ESG uh, did mention, in fact, the startling fact that the Philippines, despite our level of poverty and lack of economic progress vis-a-vis our next door, say Asia Pacific neighbors, is
Yes.
actually the third largest pollutant of the world's oceans. So, when I think of myself, need I be a CEO or a quality person in a company, or what, at my level as a individual resident and individual, what can I do so that
Hmm.
my actions demonstrate ESG at my level?
Yes. Well, um, something as simple as this. This is for an energy developer. We have quite a big pipeline, but
Yeah.
something as simple as how many kilometers did you travel today?
Okay.
And so if we drove by car and we were all alone in the car and we drove 20 kilometers, that's one thing, right?
Yeah.
And whether we like it or not, because it's syempre sobrang convenient, mas mabilis, you drive your own car, ESG forces us to think, wait, is there a better way? Even if maybe it's a slightly less convenient for us, you can say, okay, I drove by myself in a vehicle. and by myself, I emitted this many tons of CO2. But if I
Mm,
share the vehicle, if I carpool with two other people, hey, you divide that by three.
okay.
If you
Okay.
rode in a shuttle van or an FX, you divide that by 10 or even 15.
Okay.
Another thing is with CO2, no? A lot of us like to travel, and for those who have to fly once a year, going to Cebu is, if I'm not mistaken, 342 tons of CO2 round trip.
Wow.
Tons, huh? Tons per person.
Tons.
Yeah.
Wow. Per person, per
Yeah.
passenger.
Per journey, exactly, per round trip journey. Yeah, something like this. I think Dumaguete is about 370 something, et cetera, et cetera. So, um, on a day-to-day basis, obviously the most individual way we produce carbon dioxide is by transport, no? Because it's obvious we're in it, we're in the vehicle is spewing out the pollutants as we go. So as
Right.
far as CO2, it's really probably the commute. Uh,
Okay.
on the other hand, we also measure water consumed. You can see here in the slide, no?
Right.
So even that, no? And then electricity consumed. These things that we make big multinationals track as far as their consumption can also apply to individuals as well.
So, I mean, when you look at this list, Steph, these are list of day-to-day things
Yes,
that I can actually relate to and
yes,
relate with.
yes. Property damage, first aid, fatalities. Oh, okay, those could be in construction, but if you think about it, it's two things. One, is your place safe to work in for
Right.
employees? So you're
Right.
kind of covering the governance part as well as the transparency part under
Okay.
governance as well.
Okay.
But then also social because you're taking care of your employees, and
Okay.
then your office is okay for the community around you. Hindi siya dangerous for people to visit.
Y-
So
y- Wow,
yeah,
Steph, and I apologize to our audience because can recognize some names, but it's very interesting this particular segment of our Q&A because I can see in our audience actually some practitioners in the space of human resources, in the legal profession, learning and development, and in fact, in the IT space, particularly in the areas of skills training. And if I recall, in fact, I think if I recognize another person is in the facilities management. And that
yes,
particular last slide of yours around uh, safety incidents and health and
yes,
safety environment,
yes,
fatalities, accidents,
hmm
and all that.
yes,
That is something that any individual in those particular fields of legal, learning and development, human resources, facilities management, and quality, among others, and IT even, can relate to as something that is within their scope, something that
yes,
is within their fingertips, and I might say is ESG at my fingertips,
yes,
ESG at within my control, not necessarily bigger than what I can, not something like world peace, right? I mean, something I
right,
can
right,
relate to, something I can do
yes.
something about on a day-to-day basis on in my work.
Right. Yeah, and it's
That's
not about evaluating a stock in the stock market,
right,
using it as an
right.
investment screen. Never mind all that. On an individual level, yes,
That's
we can do all this.
very interesting. I mean,
Yes.
I don't mean to sound patronizing, but sometimes, you hear about these new principles like ESG, and sometimes if it's not if it's not prefaced appropriately in terms of how it applies to my work, but then when you go down to the detail of what it means at the level that I am performing in my function, in my area of expertise, in my line of work, and therefore make a little contribution that rolls up to the big corporate contribution, then it's something that is very relevant, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. It does roll up, by the way. Don't think that it's insignificant. It all
Right.
rolls up into, a bigger whole.
I don't mean to belabor the point, and I don't mean to share a very personal story, but I hope to get some affirmation from you, Steph. We have a very small garden where I live, but my wife has gone into for the last 5 years into composting, And what that
Yes.
has done is that we have reduced our garbage output by a third from, let's say, 5 years ago before she went into composting. And now we actually, from pots, we actually harvest vegetables that go straight from those pots into our dining table. Not to mention that they are enhanced, their growth is enhanced by the compost output, which has reduced our garbage as well. Uh,
Absolutely.
is that ESG at my level?
Well, not you're kind of beyond. Now you're practicing circular economy because you're reducing leakages out of your circle of
Okay.
resources. So that is really fantastic. That is fantastic. I just came back from visiting my parents, and they have a compost basket in their kitchen as well. Yes.
Wow.
Hmm.
That's nice. That's
In
nice.
addition to having solar rooftop, of course. But
Oh,
yes, yeah,
wow. Okay.
yes,
That's great. That's great.
yeah,
Congratulations to them and
yeah.
thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, not to like make them, examples or anything, but just it was I was very happy to see that also
That's
to see
great.
that with
That's great.
people who are older than us.
Yes.
Not trying to imply anything, Sir June, but it's really great for our wiser elders to be setting examples for the young ones.
That's great.
It's very
Thank
good.
you. Thank you for
Yes,
sharing that. Steph, we are down to 11 minutes before we close this
yes.
webinar. So I just want to just ask the audience, do you have any particular questions? In the meantime, while you're thinking of your questions, there are a couple that came up here. One is, well, a couple of them from Ed. Let's start with the one
Yes.
that's more recent. Does the Philippine government extend incentives with ESG investments? Do you know?
Nope, there is just reporting requirements. The good news is they don't need to. Investment performance in ESG assets are actually, at least if you look at the S&P 500, is actually
Okay.
better than non-ESG right now. So
Okay.
if you invest in well, I'm just talking about investments, no, but basically, you don't even have to provide incentives because uh, they're performing better in some places.
Okay. And you know what? I suddenly realized that one of your slides, which I don't think we covered, is the question of whether ESG uh, equates to better financial performance for a company. And I remember you shared that with me. I can't recall if you actually have a slide on that, Steph. Do you?
Here it is. By 2025, one third of investments, global investments, will be in ESG. That's about 53 trillion US dollars. And if you look at the return of the S&P 500 is the basket of yung mga stocks, no? Different stocks in the US. And then S&P 500 has a specific ESG lang.
Okay.
Ina-average nila yung performance. In other words, if you buy a stock today, in 1 year, magkano na yung kinita mo?
Yeah.
In the past year, you can see here that the ESG basket outperformed the normal basket.
Wow.
Over 3 years, outperform. Over 5 years, outperform. Over 10 years, outperform.
Wow.
We don't need incentives even, but I love the
Yeah.
question of Ed,
Yes.
because government should still drive, improvement in behavior. But in this case, you can see they don't even have to
So this is
from the
very
investors.
revealing. This is very revealing. I mean, this is most definitely a testament to putting money into ESG can actually result in better financial performance.
Yes. And that is why it's ironic that maybe what I just wanted to update everyone kasi nga the situation or no. It's ironic there's such a backlash against ESG. Just a couple of months ago, 49 anti-ESG bills or the counting, no? They counted 49 anti-ESG bills in the US. About 18 states want to outlaw it, basically,
Wow.
meaning at least or not outlaw it as an option, but at least the states are not allowed. The state governments would not be allowed to use ESG as a screen for their state
Oh,
funds.
okay.
And you can see here both the two biggest business papers in the world
That's right.
are touting that there's a problem with ESG now. There's a big backlash, which is true. So I just
Okay.
wanted to give a heads up on that. It doesn't feel like that in the Philippines, but in the States, this is mainly driven by, like I said, really race. No, they don't want the people against ESG don't like policies that favor one race over the other, even if the
Okay.
purpose is to compensate for injustice. They believe
Okay.
it shouldn't be done. And so, yeah, that's this. We're
Uh,
here now.
all right. Well, not to dwell extensively on that, but would you say that it therefore has become politicized in a way?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
So ESG
That's
has a political challenge. It's not an economic challenge. Again, you can see the performance of ESG stocks is better. A small group of politicians are trying to reverse ESG practice. The problem is there are other countries that have similar politicians. So if they follow suit, then this will spread. And it's ironic that they have a different take on the saying that never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. This small group of citizens is changing the world, but the other direction.
okay. Okay.
So, yep. And so what's
All right.
likely to happen is there will be some fragmentation. There'll be countries that practice ESG and maybe some countries or states that
Okay.
will not practice it.
Okay.
So
Okay.
that's it
Well,
as far as information.
Steph, this has been a highly informative and enlightening webinar. Before we extend our appreciation to you, any last parting words for maybe a minute or a minute and a half from you, Steph?
Actually, maybe this is the best time to hear from everyone. I think I've said everything that needed to be said, and I hope everybody uh got something out of this evening. But I would love to hear what's in your minds and hearts.
Okay. All right. We'd like to express our appreciation to our dear speaker. So once again, participants, thank you for joining us. But please express our appreciation to Steph either through an emoji or a chat. And really, once again, Steph, thank you very much for spending this evening with us. It has been very, very informative, enlightening, educational, and certainly we have learned a significant much about ESG, sustainability, even at the level of the individuals. Thank you very much, Steph, and we hope that this will not be the last time.
Thank you so much, especially to our friends who participated and everyone for attending. Thank you. Learned a
Yeah, and
lot as well. Thank you.